Lithuania wants to beef up 30 miles of its border to deter Russian aggression with minefields, booby-trap bridges and concrete tank traps. Lithuania says the project shows its dedication to EU and NATO security. But is it enough to protect the Baltic state? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, Lithuania has unveiled plans for a three-layered defensive line, costing over $1 billion to fortify part of its border with Russia and Belarus. Work has already begun installing tank-stopping concrete blocks, so-called Dragon's Teeth, on its border with Russia's Kaliningrad. But how effective will this huge defence project be in protecting Lithuania and securing its borders?
Work has already begun on Lithuania's ambitious defence project. It's building a fortress of high razor wire fences and anti-tank obstacles known as Dragon's Teeth. It's part of a Baltic defence strategy with Latvia and Estonia and Europe as a whole against Russian aggression.
Europe needs a strong Lithuania to protect our borders and our people.
The defence line aims to protect the Suwalki Gap, NATO's most vulnerable corridor between Russia's Kaliningrad and Belarus. Lithuania's ambitious 30-mile border defence plan will be multi-layered. The first layer features anti-tank ditches, deadly minefields and fortified trenches. The second tier includes bridges rigged for immediate demolition, and the third has anti-drone systems and tree lines as natural barriers. To fund this grand plan, Lithuania will increase its defence budget and seek funding from the EU.
About 1 billion euros will be dedicated to the strengthening of our border and exactly in building the Baltic defence line together with our neighbour Poland.
Lithuania's Ministry of Defence hopes the project shows its dedication to EU and NATO security. The country aims to boost its defence spending to between 5 and 6% of GDP by 2026, in line with NATO's target. The defence border will take 10 years to complete, so will it really protect Lithuania in time?
Well, let's bring in our guests. In Vilnius, the capital of Lithuania, we have Liudas Abisala. He is head of marketing and communications. That's at RSI Europe, a Lithuanian company that develops and manufactures radios and electronics for defence. Also in Vilnius, we have Linas Kojala. He is a non-resident fellow in the Foreign Policy Research Institute's Eurasia programme. And in Brussels, we have Jamie Shea. Jamie is former NATO Deputy Assistant Secretary General. You're all very welcome to this roundtable. Liudas, I'll come to you first. Just talk us through the Lithuanian thinking here with these defence measures. How badly needed is this?
So it's very simple. The more prepared we are, the better defended we are, the less are the chances that we're going to have to use those systems and whatever is going to be put in place. We clearly see what is going on and what's been going on for over 10 years in Ukraine since the occupation of Crimea. We see that the Russian government and Kremlin does not have any plans to stop at any time soon. And should any sort of ceasefire agreement be reached, especially if it's an unfair agreement to Ukraine, it's more than likely that it's going to be me and my fellow countrymen defending our country right here.
Linus, to you, so the whole Ukrainian situation has really sharpened Lithuanian minds about defence.
Yes, for sure, because we see that the war is continuing, as mentioned, for many years. People are dying and there is no intention from the Russian side to stop. Plus, we've heard multiple times already from Russia that they have goals beyond Ukraine. They would like to reconsider the European security architecture and possibly tackle countries on NATO's eastern flank, with their membership in NATO being in doubt from the Russian perspective, and certainly troops that are stationed in the Baltics from our allies is not a thing that Russia supports. So we have to work on things that haven't been done for many years. So Lithuania was not a leading spender in NATO on defense just 15 years ago, Now we are the second biggest spender in NATO with 4% of GDP spent on defense this year and reaching 5.25% next year. So unfortunately, the reality is that many European countries have to compensate for things not done before. And that means increased defense spending, increased readiness and resilience in order to deter, because nobody wants to fight a war. We only want to deter Russia from even thinking of such scenarios.
Thanks, Linas. Jamie, to you, are they right to be worried in Lithuania?
Yes, I think they are, because there's a lot of different activity going on, all of which requires a greater focus on border defence. First of all, as was mentioned by the other two guests, there's been the impact of the Ukraine war and not quite knowing where the Russian army is going to be, closer or more distant to NATO's borders, when finally there's a ceasefire there. But even while continuing to prosecute its aggression against Ukraine, the Russians are still exercising to attack NATO. They've got a big exercise called Zapad, which is going to kick off in Belarus next week, where they're going to mobilize about 40,000 troops, despite the fact that they've got 600,000 of their troops involved in Ukraine. So NATO has to keep a watchful eye on that. But there've also been, of course, rogue missiles and drones coming across the border as a result of the Ukraine conflict, which have landed in the Baltic states, Poland, and Romania. There's been Russian airspace violations of NATO airspace. So that's also meant that NATO countries, not just the countries on the borders themselves, have had to go into a heightened state of vigilance. And then finally, Enda, there's what we call hybrid warfare, where the states on the borders feel particularly vulnerable. The cyber attacks, the disinformation campaigns, the influence campaigns, the fact that in that region, many underwater cables and pipelines have been either blown up or been severed. For instance, even a dam in Norway was the victim of a Russian cyber attack in the last couple of weeks. And we've had also what's called the weaponization of migration, particularly when a couple of years ago, Belarus pushed a large number of migrants across the border with Poland. So all of these things mean that there's now a sense that borders have to be better protected. There's got to be better anticipation, better early warning, better air defense, and a more rapid response capability to nip problems in the bud before they escalate into serious incidents.
Jamie, we've heard from Russian spokespeople before. They always say that this is paranoia on behalf of the West and that Russia is not interested in the Baltic nations. Do you buy that?
No, I don't, because there's enough what you might call physical or kinetic activity going on to mean that this is not simply paranoia. There are hard facts. We know, for example, that Russian drones or parts thereof have landed on the territory of the Baltic states. So far, fortunately, with the exception of 2 deaths in Poland, they haven't resulted in tragedy. But any day now, a Russian drone, not deliberately fired at the Baltic states, but maybe straying off course because Russia is attacking targets in Ukraine around Lvov, very, very close to the borders with NATO. Any day now, one of those drones or missiles could land on a supermarket with hundreds of casualties. So there really is an air defense issue. I mentioned the airspace violations by Russian fighter planes, the severance of cables. Those things have actually happened, as you well know, Enda, and of course the cyber attacks and disinformation campaigns as well. So if you are in the Baltic states, it's not just because you've got a history of difficult relations with Russia going back to centuries of wars, animosity, occupation, the forced incorporation of these countries into the Soviet Union in 1940. It's not just history and the inability, if you want, or unwillingness to get over history, but it's the fact that there's enough hostile Russian activity going on today to make these countries feel legitimately threatened and therefore needing reassurance from both NATO and the European Union.
Thanks, Jamie. Liudas, to you, just talk to me about air defense then. How worried are you about Russian drones breaching Lithuanian airspace?
So one thing to note, you introduced me and our company as someone who produces radios. We actually produce FPV drones and remote initiation systems. So in terms of airspace violation and defense against it, currently our military is in a bit in a pickle because we're not officially at war yet. So you're not allowed to, randomly shoot at targets flying over our land. So they are a little bit, their hands are somewhat tied. From what I do know is that our military and our border patrol is looking into this extremely deeply and with quite a bit of concern. I'm quite certain that we will be able to take down whatever flies in at a certain scale. At the same time, if we see quantities like we see in Ukraine, where there's Shahed drone after Shahed drone after Shahed drone flying in, and then followed by missiles, it will be difficult. There will be casualties, but at the same time, we need to do whatever is possible without panicking and without distress.
And Liudas, with your company and your experience of working in this sector, do you think Lithuania is well placed in terms of drone technology?
I do believe that Lithuania, after Ukraine, is the leading country when in terms of drone building capabilities and technology development. Our company is not alone. We have quite a few competitors / friends that are working FPV drone field. We have several companies that work in fixed wing and loitering munitions field. So I do believe that our proximity to Ukraine and our deep understanding of need for developing defenses helps us as a country in whole to be one of the leaders in Europe of this field.
Thanks, Liudas. Linas, to you, just talk to me about the geography of your country, because there's one strip of land, the Suwalki Gap, which would be clearly of interest to Russia because it would join up Russia and Kaliningrad, the Russian-controlled part of Europe. That makes Lithuania very, very interesting to the Kremlin, doesn't it?
Many things make us interesting. We're a prosperous and wealthy country, more wealthy than Russia, and probably that angers someone sitting in the Kremlin also. But yes, our geographic situation is quite complicated. We border Kaliningrad together with Poland, which is an exclave of Russia, highly militarized in normal circumstances. Currently, maybe less so because many of those troops fought and died in Ukraine already. We also have a border with Belarus, which was weaponized, as mentioned by Jamie. Over the last couple of years, Belarus brought people from a variety of countries, including Syria, Afghanistan, and pushed them physically into the territory of EU countries in locations which are on the border and certainly not there for anyone to pass, which means that there are so many ways those countries could intimidate us, and we are certainly struggling in some instances tackling those challenges. And obviously, Latvia and Estonia face the mainland of Russia directly. I think one of the worst recent developments was the fact that Belarus became no more than just a military extension of Russia. Prior to 2022, there was basically no Russian military presence in Belarus on a permanent basis, except a couple of hundred soldiers. Now it's hard to imagine Belarus not being part of Russia military basing, which means that this regime, which is very closely aligned to Russia, again becomes just a military extension of it, and that threatens us directly because we lose time. We lose time of preparation in case of any military buildup, and we also face additional nuclear pressure. I'm not saying that on a strategic level something has changed, but the fact that possibly and very likely Russian nuclear weaponry was already deployed in Belarus is certainly a sign of what's to be expected. And finally, Russia has clear plans, which are publicly announced, of increasing its size of army to 1.5 million soldiers and maybe even more in the next couple of years. So clearly, the signaling from Russia is that they are currently fighting the biggest land war in Europe since the Second World War, and they have no intentions of stopping. And that means we have to do a lot of homework as Baltic countries, as Poland, other NATO's eastern flank countries, but also all other NATO and EU member states, because if, God forbid, something happens in the Baltics, the consequences, economic, political, social, security consequences, will be felt by everyone.
Thank you, Linas. Fascinating points. Jamie, to you, when you hear those numbers, the sheer strength of the Russian military, despite the losses they're clearly having in Ukraine, can we realistically expect a country as small as Lithuania to hold Russia back?
Well, the Ukrainians, although they are larger, of course, than the Lithuanians, but the Ukrainians have shown that inferiority in numbers doesn't mean to say you can't defend yourselves. The Ukrainians have kept up a brilliant resistance against Russia for over 3 years now. And although, yes, it's true that Russia has been able to seize about 20% of Ukraine, as you said, Enda, it's been at enormous cost, and their advances, inch by inch, have been painfully slow. So, yes, it does mean that a spirited resistance, as we've seen from history, based on a very coherent sort of society, a cohesive people backed by strong institutions, David can, give Goliath a bloody nose. So I certainly wouldn't play down that spirit of resistance of the Baltic states. But of course, they do need NATO protection. And that's why NATO's been doing quite a lot recently to demonstrate that even if it doesn't have a large day-to-day permanent based military capability in Lithuania or Latvia or Estonia, it's able to get large numbers of British troops, French troops, German troops, Canadian, American troops across Central Europe quickly into the Baltic states. In fact, in early September, NATO is conducting an exercise called Quadriga, led by the German army, which is deploying large numbers of forces to defend the port of Klaipėda in Lithuania, because ability to have those ports for supplies, for reinforcements, is very important. The Germans also recently decided to upgrade their multinational NATO battalion in Lithuania to a full-size brigade. The Americans have now stationed more troops in the Baltic states, together with some heavy armor. So NATO is doing what it can do to really demonstrate that it's not only committed politically to defend these countries, but also has the reinforcement, quick reaction capability to do so. And of course, this also goes for air exercises in the Baltics and naval exercises. Of course, Enda, we haven't mentioned them yet, but Sweden and Finland coming into NATO in the wake of Putin's invasion of Ukraine has also, of course, meant that NATO now has a much greater access and control of the Baltic than it had while these countries were neutral. And I think this has helped as well. But there are some vulnerabilities. We've been talking about them already. The air defense picture, the ability to cope with immense repeated Russian drone and missile attacks, such as we see in Ukraine, to defend civilian populations, the ability to control borders, construction of more border fortifications like Dragon's Teeth, tank traps, all those kind of things have to be really the priority for NATO and defense spending going forward.
Thanks, Jamie. Liudas, to you, just looking at your border, 275 kilometres of a border with Kaliningrad, Russian enclave, and a much, much larger Lithuanian border with Belarus. How worried are you about those borders and, the urgent need to strengthen there?
So, yeah, in total, we have about 670 kilometers of border with Russia and Belarus. At the same time, worried is not the word that I would use. We are concerned. We are thinking about it. We are taking measures to make sure that we protect them. At the same time, I think mentally, a lot of us are prepared for whatever's coming. And we know that whatever the we will have on borders, we will make sure to protect them ourselves with the help of the military, the territorial defense, the Rifleman Union, and all the other organizations. Obviously, we do need to take measures to make sure we have, what the previous guest mentioned on the Dragon's Teeth and tank traps and mines. Lithuania recently left the Ottawa Agreement, and we're now planning to implement landmines on the border as well. So I think those measures need to be taken as fast as possible, as soon as possible. I do believe that we are working in that matter. We had this presentation of what was called the Vytautas Magnus defense wall, I believe 4 layers, including dugouts and anti-tank traps and all those things. They need to be implemented. At the same time, we not need to forget that we don't only have a border with Kaliningrad and Belarus, we also have a border with Latvia and a neighboring Daugavpils area, which potentially would also be a track that the Russians would use to attack us, kind of going behind our lines on the border with Belarus. So that needs to be taken into account as well.
Thank you, Liudas. Just to you, Linas, now that landmines have been mentioned, I see Lithuania pulled out with the Ottawa Convention, and a lot of people feel that this was completely as a result of the perceived threat from Russia. Is that a fair assumption?
For sure. And I have to say that it was not a decision taken lightly. Not a lot of people wanted to make this step, which was also done by some of our neighboring countries. Unfortunately, the reality is as such. We are facing an enemy that does not play by any rules. So we cannot tie one of our hands behind our backs and just continue deterring and fighting in such condition. That means we have to keep all of our options open, including landmines that are risky for civilians for many years after any military conflict. And hopefully that does not need to be deployed anytime in the future. But it is another layer of defense. There are many layers. First of all, society has to be resilient. Our army, the national army, has to be prepared. That's why we are building up a division. Hopefully by 2030, Lithuania will have its own division, which is a significant force on NATO's mapping. Hopefully we'll have Germany's brigade already present in Lithuania by the end of 2027. This is extraordinary development. 5,000 German troops permanently stationed in another NATO country is not something that we've seen before. So we have to admit that there are certain positive developments. We also have to work on the borders. And I think one of the essential aspects is that Lithuania is not doing these decisions on its own. We are in close coordination with other Baltic countries, with Finland. We're talking about the Baltic Shield, a cooperation between 3, 4, or 5 countries, making sure that the border with Russia, with Belarus, is fully capable of withstanding any attack, and that it doesn't have any weak links, because obviously NATO is an alliance. It's a unified alliance, and if there is a weak link, then we're all vulnerable. So one country is not enough in making these decisions, and thankfully I see way more potential for cooperation than ever before, because we have to also admit that sometimes we're competing with one another and not using those limited resources effectively, but that's been changing.
Thank you, Linas. Jamie, students of history will remember reading all about the Maginot Line in France during World War II. I've seen some criticism of Lithuania's plans here, saying that it's just a glorified Maginot Line and that when it comes to it, it may not be that worthwhile or effective. Have you any concerns about that?
I don't, Enda, because you're right, I'm a student of history, and so are you, Enda, and therefore you know very well that the Maginot Line in May and June 1940 did not foul. The problem was that General Guderian and General Manstein, the great German tank commanders, simply bypassed it by going through the Ardennes and the Belgian region into France. Had they sort of come up against the Maginot Line directly, then it could have been another story. So I think the lesson is not that Maginot Lines don't work. It's just that if you're going to have a Maginot Line, make sure it runs along all of your border and there's not some little sort of bypass at north or south that your enemy can work around. So make it as comprehensive as possible.
Thanks, Jamie. Liudas, just as we reach the end of the conversation, you've got a new Prime Minister, Inga Ruginiene. Tell me, is this her number one priority then for Lithuania and your people, defence?
Well, absolutely. If our defense fails, then all the other elements as education, social protection and everything does not matter anymore. So without, being too psychotic about it, but we do need to focus on defense. We do need to make sure that we protect what is worth protecting, and then to develop further in those directions.
Linas, to you, she will have the complete backing, I'm guessing, of the Lithuanian people. Whatever she wants to spend on defence, however far she wants to go, people will back her.
Yeah, for sure. There is a very strong consensus in Lithuania, both in public and amongst the political elite, that this is what needs to be done. And I've talked with the Prime Minister some time ago, and she confirmed that the plan of spending 5.25% of GDP on defense next year is in place, and nothing's changing in that regard. And even if she comes from a bit of a different field, she worked mostly on social issues in her political and professional career. She knows and understands the priority. And again, I'm very happy to say that still in Lithuania we have this strong consensus, which means that most of the decisions are taken pretty quickly.
Linas, thank you so much. Jamie and Liudas as well in Vilnius. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable TRT World. But for now, from me, Enda Brady, and all the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.